and welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. I am so grateful that you're here. My name is Kim Manager, and I'm a women's leadership coach. I started this podcast because as a lifelong sufferer of imposter syndrome and a coach who sees this in 98% of the women I meet, I wanted to take this conversation to a bigger stage, so to speak. Imposter syndrome is triggered by a lot of things, but two of the primary triggers are transitions and feeling different from those around us. Women in traditionally male-dominated environments experience these triggers on an almost daily basis, so it's only natural that we would feel this way. What compounds these feelings is the sense that we are alone. The belief that if we share our feelings, we'll expose our incompetence even further. So we carry it around like a deep, dark secret. I started this podcast because I want to put a stop to this nonsense and destigmatize imposter syndrome. Because we don't talk about it, we look around and assume that everyone around us has it all figured out, that we're somehow the exception to the rule, when in reality, we're all feeling this way. And when we can own that and say it out loud, we all benefit. Nobody more so than you. So thanks again for being here. If you enjoy it, please share it with others who might also benefit.
Welcome, Stacey. I'm really excited to talk to you today, and I'd love to start just by asking you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for having me today. I am a podcast host as well, which I think is in some ways how we were connected, facilitator, and my business is called Engage the Room. And my focus, it's leadership development. And my focus is really around shedding formalities that stifle our personality and ideas. My belief is that we, hide it. We can't advocate for ourselves if we're hiding behind something. And human connection is really hard if we're acting like robots. So I want to kind of do away with some of what we think we have to do if it's not natural for us, and step into more of who we are as leaders and emerging leaders, so that we can have better working relationships, get our ideas heard, and ultimately have the impact that we want. So that's me professionally. For fun, I take voice lessons, singing lessons, and stand-up comedy classes. So I am working on my retirement gig, I guess, and living out my childhood dream to be an entertainer. As a young girl, I wanted to sing and dance and make people laugh. And my journey has brought me back to that dream.
I love that. It's so inspiring too, because it's a little scary.
So scary. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to talk with you about the connection between what you do and this conversation around imposter syndrome. And before we go there, I just want to ask you what your thoughts are on what does imposter syndrome mean to you, and have you experienced it at all? Has it shown up at all in your work or in your life?
Mm-hmm. Yep. What I've come to learn about it, I'll start there. What I've come to learn about it from my experience is that imposter syndrome for me came from a place of disconnect, of not truly acknowledging what my expertise is. So the example is, my business is around communication and relationship building. And for a long time, because this business kind of found me, I didn't necessarily create it. It just evolved over time. And so for a long time in the beginning of that, I had a lot of thoughts around why are people asking me to teach them how to communicate better? Why are they asking me to help with networking? These are all things that I'm trying to develop for myself. How is it now that I'm teaching others? So there was a lot of that negative self-talk. Who do I think I am doing this? I don't have enough skill, knowledge, experience. But what I've come to learn through lots of coaching and, learning and reading and all the things is that I think sometimes we don't look at what our true expertise is. So for me, I was looking at communication as my expertise, but what I have come to realize, and honestly, this happened very recently when I did a rebranding for my business, but my expertise is actually as a facilitator, creating an environment for people to practice. And so you could throw almost any topic in front of me. My expertise is actually creating the environment to do the work around that topic, not the topic itself. And so once I realized that, I was like, whoa, that changed everything in terms of how I present myself and promote myself as a business owner. The topic is communication and leadership, but the expertise is actually in the facilitation. And so that was a really powerful shift for me.
I feel like there are a lot of people who are listening who are probably struggling with this question themselves, maybe not even realizing it until you just said that. Because I do think that we either have certain impressions of what our expertise is or what it should be, or we look to others to tell us what that expertise is. And certainly that kind of feedback can be helpful. But how did you figure that out? Like, is there a way that for anybody who may be asking the same question to get there?
I sought out an outside perspective. I hired somebody. I hired a consultant. This for me, it was more. I wasn't expecting to come up with this, but it was a branding and copywriter who specialized in bio writing, and her whole premise is uncage your epic credential. And so she looks at everything. She's a 21 question questionnaire that goes through your work experience, your personal life. Not like dirty laundry personal life, but just accomplishments and, beliefs that you have and words that you kind of rail against and things. It was a very unique questionnaire that I had never seen questions like some of these. So it really got you digging in and digging deep. And then she took a look at it and came up with, she's like, this is what I'm seeing. Is this resonating? And it was all landing. I was like, oh my God. So I think sometimes we have to, and there are definitely people who will tell us, but you're so good at this. And then we think we have to keep going. For me, I wanted someone who didn't know me at all. So this woman, I'd never met her. I'm in Boston area. She's out in Portland, Oregon. So we were like different coasts. I heard her on a podcast, but I wanted someone who had never met me and didn't know anything about me to take a look at all of that information and find that thread for me. And I really had no idea that it would be so powerful of a process, but that's how I ended up realizing this and coming more into alignment with what my expertise actually is. So an outsider looking in to see all of to make those connections for me. Because I think in general, we tend to get too close to our own work, and the people who know us best, love us most, are too close to that too.
Absolutely. I think that's a great starting point, is to just really know your expertise, right? And sounds simple, but I'm sure that every one of us is on a different journey to get there.
Yeah. Because it may not be what we think.
Exactly.
Right. Or what we were expecting. And so, you asked to kind of a two-part about imposter syndrome. I mean, I see a lot of, especially women, thinking they need more credentials before they have that credibility. And I say, no, take a look, go back in time, take a look, because you probably have, I trust that you have enough.
Yes. Absolutely. And I want to bring in your expertise here, because I'm really excited to have this conversation around the shedding of the formalities, right? So tell me a little bit more about what your thoughts are around that, or your general philosophy on the importance of more informality in our workplace interactions.
So it comes down to two things. One, what I have learned is that formality weighs a ton. So if we are acting the way we think we're supposed to act, or acting the way we've been taught to act, that can weigh really heavy on us, because it doesn't allow us to fully express who we are, or that expertise, the ideas that we have, the vision that we have, the ability to reach out and just say hello to people, whatever that might be. So it weighs really heavy on us. And I think, we're talking about imposter syndrome. And I think if we live with all that formality, it can definitely contribute to feeling less than, because we're not stepping fully into who we are. And the second part is that when we can relinquish that, and I always shake my hands, it's like, shake it off. We're able to step into our abilities more naturally. So whether that's as a leader, as a presenter, at a meeting or a conference, networking, facilitating a meeting, whatever kind of interaction we're having, I think when we can step into what's natural for us. So an example is a very simple one. I know a lot of people who do not like presenting with PowerPoint, but they do it because either the conference requested it or the media, it's how they always do things in their company. I'm like, well, if it's not going to allow you to do your best work and there's a different way for you to get the message across effectively for everyone involved, don't use the darn PowerPoint. But on the flip side, there are some people who thrive that way, right? So the formality is really, if it's weighing you down and holding you back, can you shed it? And if it works for you, fine. Another example is I spoke at a women's conference recently, and one of the comments like on the chat was, I showed up, it was virtual, so it was on Zoom. So I'm wearing my jammies on the bottom and my slippers, and, I'm all cozy at home, and that's fine. And a lot of people are doing that these days. I mean, Zoom and being in a virtual world has definitely shed a lot of formality. The other side of that I presented to them is, how do you want to show up as a leader or an employee or a business owner? And does having your jammies on allow you to do that? If it does, fine, great, wear your jammies. And if it doesn't, you might think again about what is going to allow you to show up the way that you want to show up. So there's different, it's different for everybody. And it's really about the end game is what's natural for you so that you can basically, do your best work.
I really love this. And I would say I've been on a personal journey around this whole theme myself, because I do a lot of presentations, I do a lot of workshops. And in the beginning, I used to think of myself as less than or illegitimate in some way because my style is more casual and less formal. I want it to be conversational. My talking points are usually story-based and not academic models. And I used to think, I don't have the same credibility as someone who's standing up there like a professor giving research. And then I started to get feedback from people saying, you're so relatable. It spoke to me, right? And I realized all these ways in which I was beating myself up for being not academic enough were the reasons why people were connecting with me and wanting to hear what I had to say. And so that really resonates with me, what you're saying. And I wonder too, because I have a little bit more freedom as an entrepreneur, are there ways in which we need to think about this in the workplace if we work for others or we're part of certain types of cultures? Like, are there questions we should be asking ourselves or things we should be keeping in mind as we think about maybe liberating ourselves a bit from the
I mean, yes. And as we're both business owners, so we definitely have more freedom. And to what you were saying, I come from a market research background. So I come from like not heavy data, more qualitative, but data points and bullet points and all of that. And that was my presentation style when I first left corporate to start a business, because I didn't know any better. And it was awful. I always left feeling like, ew, that was so horrible. And people would be like, oh, nice job. Like, oh my God, this is this is so bad. And until I learned like you about story and like what actually connects us. And, as more entrepreneurial, we definitely have more freedom. And I've come to tell clients, I'm like, look, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get an experience. I'm not going to give you PowerPoint. I'm not giving you data points. I'm not giving you theory or research. You can look that up online. You're hiring me for the practice experience. So I'm going to set things up, and then you're going to do all the work, and I'm here to create the environment. And a lot of my clients, they really like that. So if you work for a company, I think there's definitely cultures that allow for this to happen, because I've worked with also, different size companies. Some of them are like, yeah, we need something new. They don't even realize it's a possibility because everybody's doing the same thing. It's just how things are done. So if everybody's doing the same thing, you don't even realize that there's a different way. And then there are some cultures that just don't. I mean, I've heard people say, oh no, I could never stand up in a meeting and present. Are you going to get fired? Because if you're going to get fired, don't do it. But if you can't, all right, so this might be controversial, but I truly believe, having worked internally in companies and now on my own, if you have to stifle yourself in some way, you might want to think about the culture that you're working in. Because I really don't think it does anybody any good to stifle, because it is the individual experiences, uniqueness, ideas that we have that can fill in blanks, that, and make an idea more whole, make a team more whole. If everybody's just the same, then everybody's just the same. So I think there's a lot of questioning that has to happen, and those are hard questions.
I could not agree with you more. I know it sounds controversial, and I know it sounds overly simplistic sometimes, because we are in a tough economy, and finding a new job isn't as simple as it might have been in other times. But I do think you're absolutely right that we need to ask ourselves the question: if I can't be myself in, obviously there's a limit to authenticity. We have to behave as professionals when we go into our workplace. But if the expectation is complete conformity, if the expectation is we do things this way and there's no opportunity for creativity or to do anything differently or to put my own signature on something, then not only are you not doing yourself a service because you can't do your best work in that environment, but the company's not going to get very far either. Right? There's a limit to how effective the overall organization is going to be with that model.
Right. Two things from what you said. One is, I have worked with advertising agencies in the past, and, creative agencies, and that's why they're hired, right, for creativity. But I tended to work with a lot of the more planner analysis kind of folks. So heavy data, is this ad campaign working? And I finally looked at some of them like, you're being hired for your creativity. So give me some creativity when you're giving these client presentations. Like, that's what they're looking for, and it's just funny how we get stuck sometimes in it's just like what's right in front of us without the exploration. The other thing you said was about authenticity and the limits to that. And I just had this conversation with somebody last week. I think authenticity is misunderstood. And I don't like to use the word anymore, but, I think about when the pandemic first started, I was so angry. I lost a lot of my business. You just like all the things, right? And I just was welling up with emotion. And, online on social media, you might see people just spewing that first thing that comes out. And it probably shouldn't have come out. So I think, to really be ourselves, we have to process that strong emotion first before we put it out there, so we have to take care of it behind the scenes. Like, why am I so angry? How can I settle this? And then figure out, what conversation do I have to manage this? So when you said that, I feel really strongly about that. I think we misunderstand authenticity and a lot of the strong emotions that we think, but I'm authentically angry.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. But process it for yourself first, so that when you're actually in front of people, the conversation is more respectful and genuine and caring, and says what you need it to say without the heightened emotion that could negatively impact the relationship.
That just reminds me of an article I read this weekend that talked about the difference between our authentic selves and our best selves. And I think there truly is a difference, like you said, and emotions are a big part of that. I would love to hear from you just some other examples of how we can be more informal in the workplace, and how to sort of manage our own experience to feel more confident, to feel more like ourselves.
I think there's a few ways. Some of the things that I've seen work is, from a from a leadership perspective, it's creating that environment where people feel safe. You hear a lot about psychological safety in the workplace. So do people feel like they can express themselves and share themselves without, judgment, criticism, any of the negative aspects that come with that? So I think there's a lot of awareness that has to happen, self-awareness, and then other awareness around creating that psychological safety. So it's, do I feel safe? Things as simple as small talk in a meeting, just to break the ice and create connection. And I don't mean small talk like, hey, how about that weather? I mean a little bit bigger small talk that actually gets to know people. So it's more personal versus generic. So I think small talk is often overlooked because people don't want to do it too much and, have it be trite, and people don't like small talk. But small talk doesn't really have to be small. It serves a really strong purpose in terms of creating meaningful connection and trust with people. So I think bringing that back a little bit, and just where we are right now in the pandemic, most people working remotely, meetings remote, no large in-person gatherings, that on its own has created an informality. I mean, we're in our homes, right? You see pets, you see, I'm looking at you, Kim, right now. I can see a treadmill in the background. So that tells me something about you, right? So there's a natural informality that's happening with Zoom. I don't think, we should still be wearing pants when we're talking to people, but, but it has taken away a wall, I think, that we had prior to this, where we almost forgot we were interacting with human beings. And now that people are in their homes or their backyard or, wherever they may be, and you see children and pictures on the wall and family members coming in and out, it's changed a lot of things. I think for the better. Like, I'm okay with it. But yeah, so those are a couple of things. It's thinking about the environment that you have, and is it safe? Can you have a little bit of chit chat and just get to know people? And then the natural informality that we're dealing with right now remotely.
I agree with you on just the opportunity that this moment has presented in terms of our ability to better get to know people in ways that we otherwise would not. We wouldn't be able to ordinarily see into their homes and get a window into their lives. I also think when we talk about this concept of safety, really, there's no better way to feel safe than to feel like you know and trust the people around you, right? And so I think, like you're saying, if we're living in these artificially formal worlds where we don't really engage, we don't get to know each other as humans, the people around us are going to feel intimidating. We're going to make up stories about who they are and what they think about us. Those people are not in our favor. Right. We are going to see the commonalities, what makes us both more similar than different. And that's going to create anxiety. It's going to make us doubt ourselves. Whereas if we understand, and I often joke, if we both know that, oh, you may be 3 levels higher than I am and in a totally different area of the business, but we both have kids who play soccer on the weekends, right? Like, that creates a connection there that makes it feel more comfortable to talk to each other.
One of the things I do in all my programs, because I often, for me, it's like all of this starts with the individual before it can lead, has that ripple effect to other people. And so one of the activities I do is I have people draft out their career story, like what got them to where they are now, regardless of what level they're at. And at first people are like, why do you want me to do this? And I'm like, I promise it's all going to come together. And by the end of it, even though it's not this, written masterpiece, what it does for people, because then they share it with each other, get feedback and, modify, etc. It does a couple of things. One, it helps people understand the value they bring to a situation. But for the person listening, it gives you a glimmer of their world in a way that you don't normally get it. And I always have people, even on Zoom, say, oh, I'm so glad we did this activity because I've worked with these people for 5 years and I feel like I actually know them now. And, we move so fast. Everything's fast. We speak in data points. And when you have that opportunity to share a deeper part of yourself, that's typically more interesting and more engaging. It strengthens that connection, and some walls drop. Some of those formalities drop, and you see people in a very different way.
Yeah, you were just making me think too that how would I engage with someone if I were choosing to spend time with them, right? Is different from how I engage with somebody who I'm in a workplace with. And it doesn't have to be. These are people that we spend the bulk of our lives with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they probably see us more than we see our children.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So why not invest a little bit more in getting to know them as people and not, as you and I were talking about before, robots.
Right. Yep. Yep.
Now, one of the things that drew me to you was this whole conversation too around introverts and extroverts and just the challenge. As I see it, I'm an extrovert and I don't claim to understand what an introvert feels like in a meeting that's dominated by a few extroverted voices, but I could certainly sympathize. And I've certainly spoken with enough introverts to understand the challenge and the frustration and the pain that comes with that. Mm-hmm. Are there things that you would specifically recommend to introverts in workplaces that tend to be biased towards extroverts?
I think so. As someone who, I think I relate more to being an ambivert. So I'm definitely, I like people. Sometimes I feel energized by those interactions, but then when it comes to, being in a meeting and speaking off the cuff and even just, regular presentations, it's exhausting. I need the downtime, and I need time to think. So I definitely float both sides of this coin, and ambivert is a real thing. But one of the things that I've learned and do, and so for the introvert who's maybe not running the meeting, if they're comfortable to have a conversation, to let people know, look, I need time to process before I can just speak. I need to take in the information, formulate for a moment, and then present you with, with what I came up with. So, having the courage to have those conversations in advance to let people know. And I always say it's so that you can do your best work. So present it that way. It's, for me to be the best team member, this is how I process information and can contribute. If you're the leader running the group or the meeting, it's having the awareness that everybody may have something to contribute, and they may not all feel comfortable in that moment. And so when I'm doing groups, I always give people a chance to think on their own for a couple minutes, jot down some notes. Then I put them in small groups so that they can talk, more comfortably in groups 2 or 3 or whatever. Then I open it up to a bigger group. And I don't necessarily hear from everybody, but get a couple of highlights. And what that does is it gives everybody in the room a chance to talk a little bit, right? So even if it's not to the big group, they had a chance to share things in the smaller group. And that often is enough. We all have ideas and thoughts that deserve to be heard. And so it's figuring out how to make that happen. And sometimes we have to take control of that, especially if other people don't realize that it's a thing. We have to be willing to bring the awareness. That's hard.
It is, but you're absolutely right. And I do think that in meetings that favor extroverts or just work cultures, there is a natural tendency for introverts to feel less than, right? To feel like I'm not showing up as effectively or as visibly. Right. And so I love what you're saying about letting people in. And it's unfortunate that we do make assumptions about people. And when introverts are quieter and don't necessarily share, they're almost a clean slate that we project upon, right? And make assumptions. Mm-hmm. What are they thinking? What are they? How do they feel about us? And so the more that you can share, this is how I operate. The stronger you will feel, and the easier it is for others to engage you.
I mean, I had a woman once, she was the executive director of a nonprofit. She was running her board meetings and she was so beside herself. She told me, she's like, I got these people and they email me, a couple hours later with their ideas and it's too late by then. Oh my God. like, do you understand that not everybody, some people need time to process before they can speak up and, they just need that added time. And her whole face, she was like, wait, that's a thing? I was like, yes, it's a thing. And like, it's a real thing. So please don't dismiss people who need a little extra time, and then you're going to end up losing good people because they're not going to feel valued.
Absolutely. Wow. I hope that sticks with her. I hope that now that she knows that.
I hope so too. Yeah.
Oh.
And the other part for the actual introvert, because I've been in those meetings where, I think a couple things. I think introverts often have some of the best ideas because they are more thoughtful. They make some of the best presentations because they do take the time to really think through ideas and things like that versus just kind of getting it out there just for the sake of getting it out there. So those voices are absolutely worth hearing. And the other part for the introvert is if you have an idea, because this was something told to me and it really made a difference. If you have an idea and it's not fully formed, say what you have, because it can be a jumping off point for others to say, oh, and what about this? And what about this? And before you know it, there is a fully formed idea. So it doesn't have to be complete to put it out into the world.
That's another great point. I think
that was a huge lesson for me.
Yeah. Wow. So this has been really helpful. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I want to wrap up by asking you a couple questions of, what motivated you to want to be here and tell your story, and what do you hope people will take away from it?
So what motivated me was you reached out. No. So, I mean, as I said, I host my own podcast, so I'm always on your side of the microphone, asking the questions, which I absolutely love. But then, after doing some rebranding and having a new message, I was like, I'm really excited about this. And I believe in it, wholeheartedly. All the things that we've talked about today, that shedding of formalities and speaking up for yourself, like that's just at the core of who I am. So the opportunity to talk about it is a real honor.
Thank you. I really enjoyed everything that you shared with us. I'm sure it's going to be helpful to so many people.
I hope so.
Absolutely. And good luck to you as you move forward too.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks again for listening today. If you're struggling with imposter syndrome and you'd like additional support, check out the show notes for more resources or contact me directly. I would love to help you. And if you'd like to tell your story, I would love to interview you. You will find my contact info in the show notes, so reach out anytime. Thanks again.